Hello, welcome back to Dr. Sam's Anatomy classes. Here I am continuing with my lecture series on Brainstem. In this lecture, I will be teaching you about the internal structure of midbrain. So, before studying the details about the internal structure of midbrain, let's study about the parts of midbrain. So, before teaching you about the parts of the midbrain, can you guess that this section of the midbrain is at which level? We study the internal structure of midbrain at two levels. One is at the level of superior colliculus and one is at the level of inferior colliculus. Can you guess this section is through which colliculus, superior or inferior colliculus? Because they haven't mentioned about this as superior or inferior colliculus. So how will you guess this section? There are two hallmark identifying landmarks in this section which will help you guess that this section is through the level of inferior colliculus, right? I believe you must have guessed by now if you're following my lectures from before. Because of this trochlear nerve decussating and emerging on the dorsal aspect of the brainstem, it's very clear that this section is at the level of inferior colliculus. Okay. Then another very important feature I told you, which is here, that is another hallmark feature for identifying the section to the inferior colliculus, and that is the decussation of superior cerebellar peduncle. So these two distinguishing features help you to identify the structures at the level of inferior colliculus. And one more thing that is like a bit, if you are very much aware of the lemniscus pattern, which is like in a necklace pattern like here. So the pattern is from medial to lateral is MTSL, medial trigeminal, then lateral, S is spinal, and then is lateral. Lateral means the lateralmost. So that's how the lamellar system is placed like a necklace. So presence of lateral lemniscus in a transverse section is also another important feature of the transverse section at the inferior colliculus, right? Because you won't find this lateral lemniscus at the section of superior colliculus. The reason is the fibers from here will reach to the inferior colliculus. From the inferior brachium they will move out to the MGB, medial geniculate body. So this lemniscus you will not find in the upper section of the midbrain. So lateral lemniscus you find only in the section through the inferior colliculus. Got it? So three important distinguishing features you have seen here. Now let's tell you about the parts of the midbrain. One thing you can see is a transverse line here, right? This transverse line passes through the central canal or the central aqueduct. Okay, then the portion of the midbrain dorsal to this transverse line is called tectum. You can see it here, it's called tectum. Then the rest of the portion ventral to this transverse line passing through the central canal of aqueduct, this portion is divided actually into two parts by the Substantia Niagra. And actually, let's say before dividing it, the part ventral to this transverse line is divisible into two parts, right and left part, and together the two right, these two are the cerebral peduncles. So each cerebral peduncle, now you can say from the dorsal to ventral side, is divided into three parts divided by the Substantia Niagra. So between the tectum and Substantia Niagra, on the two sides, or this entire area both the sides, including it's called tegmentum, right? And this tegmentum is in straight continuity with the forebrain above and with the hindbrain below. That is means the tectum continues with the pons and medulla below. Got it? While the additional feature you find here is that the ventralmost portion of the cerebral peduncles here is called the crus cerebri, and in between the crus cerebri and tegmentum is this lamellar arrangement of gray matter that's called substantia niagra. Got it? And I will tell you all about these details later on. First, have this idea clear cut that what is this portion. Dorsal portion is tectum, then ventrally you have tegmentum, then substantia niagra, and then crus cerebri. That includes both right and left cerebral peduncles on the two sides. So this crus cerebri has a space in the midline on the ventral aspect, and this space here in between is called interpeduncular fossa. Clear? Okay. Then, as I told you that you have this necklace pattern of lemniscus placed. You have this medial longitudinal fasciculus in both the sections. Then this decussation, or the two tracts. You have this tectospinal, rubrospinal tracts here, which you will find as a decussation in the segment in a section above to this. And instead of trochlear nucleus, you will have an oculomotor nuclear complex in the section above. Here the mesencephalic nucleus will be the same in upper segment. Reticular formation will be there in the upper segment, and instead of inferior you will have a superior colliculus in the upper segment. Got it? Okay, so now let's see in the next diagram. Now we are going to study about the midbrain at the level of inferior colliculus. So in the level of inferior colliculus, let's study about the gray matter first. Okay, let's study first about the crus cerebri, because crus cerebri is same, right, both in the upper and lower portion, and then after that we'll study about tegmentum and tectum. So crus cerebri, you see, that is the ventral portion which is protruding out of the tegmentum, and this is divergent upwards and laterally from the pons, reaching the two sides of the two cerebral hemispheres. And this crus cerebri is filled with abundance of myelinated descending tracts. If you divide this crus cerebri into six portions, so if you divide it into six portions, then you'll find that this middle 4/6, that means middle 4 segment, you can say, if you as I said, divide it into six portions, so the middle 4/6 is equal to 2/3. That is the area taken up by the corticospinal fibers or the pyramidal tracts. An important thing is that in this tract there is a somatotropic distribution of the body parts. You can say that the body parts are aligned like this. You have the body parts aligned like this. So the head or the cephalic fibers are medially placed. The caudal fibers or the fibers reaching to the lower limbs, they are laterally placed. that is how there's a somatotropic representation of the descending fibers in the corticospinal tract in the crus cerebri, in the middle 2/3 of the crus cerebri. Now in the anterior one, this is the anterior 1/6 of this crus cerebri contains the frontopontine fibers. Frontopontine fibers, you can see here the frontopontine fibers, they run in the medial 1/6 portion of the crus cerebri, while in the lateral 1/6 portion, this lateral 1/6 portion, the fibers that are reaching to the pontine nucleus from the rest of these lobes of the cerebrum, that includes parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. So temporopontine, parietopontine, occipitopontine fibers, they all are descending in the lateral 1/6. This is lateral 1/6 of the crus cerebri. From there, all these five from different lobes of the cerebrum are reaching to the pontine nucleus. So if you talk about corticopontine fibers, only the frontopontine, they are in the ventral most portion, ventral 1/6, while the rest of the lobes, parieto-temporal, as parietal, temporal and occipital lobes, they're all descending down. Now what happening there, when they reach in the pontine nucleus, right, in the pons, and these pontine nuclei, they even reaches to the uppermost portion of the medulla in the form of anterior arcuate nucleus, that is even ventral to the pyramidal fibers. So from the pontine nucleus, they will decussate and will move to the opposite cerebellar hemispheres through the middle cerebellar peduncles. So together this tract, the L-shaped, but the lower portion decussates to the opposite side of the cerebellar hemisphere. So this is corticopontine vertically descending fibers. Then from pontocerebellar fibers, they will reach to the opposite sides, right, through the middle cerebellar peduncles. So they will in the pons, they will be part of the basilar portion or the ventral portion of the pons. Okay. About this corticospinal, this includes corticospinal, the middle 2/3 portion includes corticospinal as well as corticonuclear fibers, right? The motor neurons for the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves. They are called corticonuclear fibers. So the corticonuclear and corticospinal, which reach into the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. So all of them, they together form this pyramidal tract. So that was about the crus cerebri, right? Then deep to the crus cerebri, there is this substantia niagra. It's a lamella of gray matter, which actually has pigmented neurons. Melanin containing pigment is there. So these are pigmented neurons, and these are dopaminergic secreting neurons, dopaminergic neurons present here in the substantia niagra. This has a role in maintenance of muscle tone, and it has it is this region here which plays an active role in this disease, Parkinsonism. So this is about the pigmented layer of the gray matter, lamina, substantia niagra, and then deep to this is the tegmentum of the crus cerebral peduncles. Look here, I think this is another way you can see that this much is called the, you know, cerebral peduncle. These are the two cerebral peduncles of the two sides. Okay, so the three parts are of the cerebral peduncle from deep to superficial: tegmentum, substantia niagra, and crus cerebri. Now tegmentum, let's talk about the tegmentum. Here in the tegmentum, the I think the gray matter, let's we discuss the gray matter first. In the gray matter surrounding this central canal, or rather the aqueduct of Sylvius, which is the cavity of the midbrain, there is a gray matter surrounding. This will be the same in upper portion of the midbrain, and in this you find there is a nuclei of the fourth cranial nerve, which is placed ventromedially in the gray matter, ventromedial to the central aqueduct. And just laterally to the central aqueduct you find is the mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, right? So about the trochlear nerve nucleus, you know, these are from the nuclei from where the lower motor neurons, they emerge with their intraneural course, they wind the gray matter and reach dorsally, they decussate here in the superior medullary velum, and there in between you have in the dorsal side you have this portion of superior medullary velum called the frenulum veli. So the two nerves emerge on the either side of frenulum veli, and then they wind along the cerebral peduncles to emerge lateral to the crus cerebri on the ventral aspect of the brain. Then about this mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, mesencephalic, the peculiarity of it is that the first order sensory neuron carrying proprioceptive sensations from the muscles are brought in here, and these are the neurons which are unipolar neurons. So they don't have a central process, they only have a peripheral process from the receptor to the cell, and that cell lies here in the mesencephalic. So this is the side where you find unipolar neurons. And from where does it bring sensations? Like from all the muscles innervated by cranial nerves. It is bringing in sensations from all the muscles innervated by cranial nerves. Let's say the 5 muscles innervated by the oculomotor nerve. Then one muscle, that is superior oblique by trochlear nerve. One muscle by the abducent nerve, lateral rectus. Then there are muscles of mastication, tensor veli palatini, tensor tympani. Then they have anterior belly of digastric, mylohyoid, all this being innervated by mandibular nerve. That's from the first brachial arch. From there the sensations are brought in here. Then not only the muscles, right, from there the root of the teeth, teeth is embedded in the socket, so from the teeth they also proprioceptive sensations being brought in here, and from the temporomandibular joint also sensations are being brought in through the mandibular nerve. Then from the muscles of the face, facial expression including platysma and all the muscles of the face, the muscles of the scalp, these are from the second branchial arch, innervated by the facial nerve, sensations have been brought in here. Then from the stylopharyngeus, the muscle of the glossopharyngeal or the third arch, and then there are muscles innervated by the fourth and the sixth arch, and those include muscles of soft palate, muscles of pharynx, muscles of intrinsic muscles of larynx, all by innervated by the by the 10th and cranial portion of accessory nerve, and finally from the muscles of the tongue, that's by hypoglossal nerve. So these proprioceptive sensations from all the muscles innervated by cranial nerve, they are brought in here to the mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Got it? Okay. Then the gray matter, we are covering up first the gray matters. The next is the gray matter you seeing is the inferior colliculus. Now inferior colliculus again is in the auditory pathway. It's a part of auditory pathway. Remember, the auditory pathway is from the this auditory pathway is from the receptors there, organ of Corti in the cochlea. From there, this first order neurons, they reach into the cochlear nerve nucleus on the two sides. Then from the cochlear nucleus, the second order neurons decussate and they reach to the opposite superior olivary nucleus, passing through the trapezoid body and trapezoid nuclei. Then from the superior olivary nucleus, the third order neurons, they ascend up in the form of lateral lemniscus. And remember, there are also nuclei in this. There are synapses here, so they call us nuclei of lateral lemniscus, because I'll be telling you how these nuclei of the lateral lemniscus, they have a role, they have connections with the medial longitudinal bundle. We'll discuss later on. So the third order neurons means from the superior olivary nucleus, the fibers of auditory tract, they ascend up to the inferior colliculus. The third order sense auditory neurons, they relay here. Got it? Then from here, the fourth order neurons, they will pass out through the inferior brachium, and to the inferior brachium, there is this MGB attached. So from there, this fourth order neurons from this inferior colliculus move out through the inferior brachium to the median geniculate body. By this time, you have received the sensation of sound and the location and direction of sound. You have perceived this much. Then that was about the gray matter you have seen here. Now I will be talking about the white matter present in the tegmentum. So firstly, the medial most structure you are seeing is the decussation of superior cerebellar peduncles. So this is actually the fibers of rubrocerebellar or cerebello-rubrar fibers. They actually is reaching, decussating and reaching above to the upper segment to the red nucleus, which is present at the level of superior colliculus. So actually they are part of superior cerebellar peduncle, these fibers. So you find in the midline there is a decussation of superior cerebellar peduncle. Then paramedially, just to ventral to this trochlear nerve nucleus, you are seeing is the medial longitudinal bundle, also called as medial longitudinal fasciculus. This I'll teach you in detail. This is for the cross communication of third, fourth, sixth and eighth and the cervical accessory nerve, spinal accessory nerve. So all these nerves integrate and they cross communicate and then establish the direction, and they actually the purpose is to balance your body and move your head and neck and the eyeballs in response to auditory, visual as well as vestibular impulses. Got it? So that was about the medial longitudinal fasciculus. I'll teach you in detail about this later on. Then if you see in the upper portion of this transverse section at the superior colliculus, there you will find a nucleus anterior to the superior colliculus, both the sides, that's called pretractal nucleus, which you're not seeing here. So fibers from that pretectal nucleus are actually, they will decussate at the upper segment and will descend down to the spinal segments of the spinal cord. So that's why this tract here is called, tectospinal tract. This is for visuoprotective reflex. So there you find is tectospinal tract. These fibers have actually already decussated in the upper segment. So now they are crossing from opposite side. Now similarly you are seeing these two paramedian longitudinal tract, and these are called the ruberospinal tract. Now these fibers have also decussated above in a segment above to this, because there was a red nucleus at the level of superior colliculus. So the fibers from there, they decussated the same segment in the form of ventral tegmental decussation, and then they cross and descend down in the form of ruberospinal tract, and they descend down into the upper portion of the spinal cord to maintain the muscle tone, especially the flexors of the opposite upper limb, and by inhibiting the action of extensors. That is about ruberospinal. By the way, I have taught you both these tracts. If you go and revise those extra pyramidal tracts, these are the part of descending tracts, the extra pyramidal descending tracts. You can even go and revise from my previous lectures. Okay, now that was about the structures in the midline here. Now I'll be telling you about this necklace shaped pattern, the arrangement of the lemnisci. This lemnisci are arranged in the manner MTSL. So remember this formula of MTSL, MTSL, right? So that is the formula. And this medial lemniscus, what are the fibers passing through medial lemniscus? Every time you come across such words, because if you are beginners, that's why I keep reminding, revising, that's the way you learn. So medial lemniscus, what are the fibers passing through this? Now this is actually carrying conscious proprioceptive sensations. These are carrying fibers from the dorsal column, right? So the fibers reaching here are actually the second order neurons carrying proprioceptive sensations from the body, maybe the upper half through fasciculus cuneatus, from the lower half through fasciculus gracilis, and then they reach here. Then when they reach in the upper portion here of this medulla, this anterior spinothalamic tract that also carries proprioceptive sensation, that also merges. So these are the ascending fibers. And remember, the dorsal column, the first order neurons, they do not relay in the spinal cord in the dorsal horn. Without being relayed, they ascend up into the middle portion of the medulla, where they find their nuclei, nucleus gracilis cuneatus with the relay, and then the second order neuron decussate at the same level to the opposite side, forming this medial lemniscus, which ascends up, and that is called internal arcuate fibers, right? So that is the area section called the section of sensory decussation passing the middle of the medulla. Then after that, the two tracts which ascend up from opposite side, taking sensations from opposite of the body, they actually forming the medial lemniscus, and it also includes the anterior spinal thalamic. By the way, let me tell you that anterior spinal thalamic crosses to this because it's bringing sensation from the body, right? So these sensations are related in the lamina 3 and 4. So the dorsal horn. So the anterior spinal fibers of anterior spinal thalamic tract, they decussate and reach to the opposite side a little 1 or 2 segments above, obliquely, and then they reach to the opposite side, lateral funiculus, and from there they're ascending up, and finally in the medulla they'll join to this medial lemniscus. Okay. Then little to that is trigeminal lemniscus. In the trigeminal lemniscus, you have seen the sections of the medulla, pons, and everywhere, because there was a spinal nucleus right from the lower pons, medulla, and even reaching to the spinal cord. That elongated nucleus was also surrounded by the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve. So spinal nucleus is spinal tract, they ascend up, and remember that spinal nucleus, spinal tract was forming a bulging on the upper lateral side of the medulla. You can say behind the origin of cranial accessory nerve and posterior lateral sulcus, there was a protuberance, remember, behind the olives, that was called tuber cinereum. So that was swelling because of swelling, or you can say eminence, because of this spinal nucleus and spinal tract. Anyway, so these ascend up. Now when you reach the upper pons, in the upper pons you find is the main or the chief sensory nucleus of the trigeminal, which receives the sensations of exteroceptive sensations from the entire face, and including from the structures within the cranium and deep into the face, including the skull, except the few places, few, that is angle of mandible and pinna behind and occipital region, that best cervical nerves. Otherwise the rest of the face is like sensations brought into the superior or the main chief sensory nucleus. Now what happens is the second order neurons of this sensory tract, V1, V2, V3, all bring in sensations to this superior sensory nucleus of the trigeminal, placed at the upper level of the pons. Now from there the second order neurons, they decussate, and second order neurons reach to the opposite side in the pons, and then they ascend up in the form of trigeminal lemniscus. Got it? So that is about this trigeminal lemniscus, second order neurons from sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Now about the spinal lemniscus. The spinal lemniscus is, like you can say, it's a continuation of the pain temperature carrying fibers. The most important sensation which makes you aware is the pain and temperature. That functional, that tract is actually lateral spinothalamic tract. The important features about this lateral spinothalamic tract is, one thing, these sensations from brought in and in the dorsal horn, they relay there in the substantia gelatinosa, and the pain sensations they relay in the substantia gelatinosa lamina 2. And then they immediately, remember the important word is they immediately cross to the opposite lateral funiculus of the spinal cord. They reach the opposite half of the spinal cord in the lateral funiculus. They ascend up in the form of lateral spinothalamic tract. Now when they ascend into the brainstem in the medulla, they are called actually the spinal lemniscus, right? So that means they are carrying pain temperature sensations from the opposite half of the body, and they have crossed at the very spinal segment, the very same spinal segment. Okay. uh, cross second order neurons are actually carrying sensations here from the lateral spinothalamic tract. Okay, and then the lateral most is the lateral lateral lemniscus. Lateral lemniscus, as I told you, it's part of the auditory pathway from, keep revising, from the organ of Corti to cochlear nucleus is number 1 neuron, from cochlear nucleus to the opposite superior library nucleus through the trapezoid body is the second order neuron. From trapezoid body they ascend up to the inferior library nucleus, and that tract is called the lateral lemniscus. The third order neurons carrying auditory sensations, they are called the lateral lemniscus. From here they will move out in the form of the fourth order neurons to the inferior brachii to the medial geniculate body. So that was about the necklace pattern of the lemniscus, and everything in between you find is a dense meshwork of fibers called the reticular formation. Impregnated in between you also find the nuclei of reticular formation, because they also are going to form the descending tracts and medial lateral reticulospinal tract, and they're also part of the extra pyramidal tracts, right? And these are the reticular system is one which makes you alert, which makes you awake, which makes you attentive, which makes your circadian rhythm, maintains your circadian rhythm, your biological clock, and also is maintaining your sleep patterns. So there is this importance about this reticular formation, right? Remember one thing I told you: if this is lost, if there is damage to the reticular formation, what will happen? A person undergoes coma, right? That is living without any orientation of time, place, person. Okay, okay, so I think we are done with this transverse section, the inferior colliculus, and now I'll be teaching you of the okay. Now here you are seeing is a transverse cut section of midbrain at the level of superior colliculus. That means here on the dorsal side you are seeing the two colliculus. These are superior colliculus. The rest of the structure here is cerebral peduncles, both the sides, and the parts are the same: tegmentum, substantia niagra, crus cerebri, I taught you in detail, and a transverse line if you pass from the cerebral aqueduct. Dorsal to that, this area here is called tectum. Okay. Now in this diagram, most of the things I've already explained. I will teach you about the features which are peculiar of this section. So let's talk about the gray matter present here. First of all, you find is this cerebral aqueduct or the aqueduct of Sylvius, which is the cavity of the midbrain. Then this gray matter surrounding, central gray matter, in which you are seeing here. Important point about this is that the oculomotor nerve nucleus is so much ventromedially placed that the two nuclei they fuse in the midline inferiorly, and as I told you, it is a nuclear complex. Means the scientists have studied about this nucleus in detail, and they found out there are specific location of cells within this nucleus for the 5 muscles of extraocular muscles which this nucleus innervates, of which the medial and the lowermost nucleus is that for the muscle that is LPS, levator palpebrae superioris. Remember, among the lots of motor nerves in the cranial nerve, 3, 4, 6, 12, these are all the general somatic efferent functional columns, and the nuclei are placed medially in the basal lamina, that. But nothing lies in the median plane because everything is bilateral, like you have paired nuclei, but this nuclei is passing through the median plane, and that is the nucleus to LPS, levator palpebrae superioris. So that's why I was telling. And another important feature I told you about this oculomotor nuclear complex was that there was this nucleus for superior rectus, of which the fibers decussate, the lower motor neurons decussate and reach to the opposite superior rectus muscle, while there are nucleus for inferior rectus, inferior oblique, medial rectus, and LPS. They all lower motor neurons innervate the muscles of the same side ipsilaterally, except the fibers reaching to superior rectus, they reach to the opposite side. So that was about the oculomotor nuclear complex. And don't forget, there is a rostrally placed nucleus above to this, and that is the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So that Edinger-Westphal nucleus is general visceral efferent functional column. It's a nucleus of that functional column. Means it's a parasympathetic, it gives origin to the parasympathetic fibers, preganglionic fibers. So that Edinger-Westphal nucleus is a part of oculomotor nuclear complex. Parasympathetic fibers, it will supply the constrictor pupillae and ciliaris. Okay, now look here, this has a very important clinical role. I'll tell you in detail afterwards. So the next thing you find is mesencephalic nucleus, placed lateral to the central canal or aqueduct of Sylvius. Lateral to that is the mesencephalic nucleus. I taught you in detail in a segment below this. So then about the gray matter present in the tectum. These are the superior colliculus, right? And ventral to that is another nucleus specific of this section, right? This section has also some peculiarities. Let me count them first. One peculiar feature is oculomotor nuclear complex. That is an identifying feature. Red nucleus, a very important landmark feature here, right? Then third thing is pretectal nucleus, which also is an identifying feature of this segment. Then absence of lateral lemniscus, that also is an identifying feature. And instead of superior cerebellar decussation here in the median plane, you have the two decussations of the same level, the fibers running at the same level, and that is tectospinal and rubrospinal decussations. So these were about the peculiar features. Now yes. So now let me tell you about a little bit about these gray matter. So it's a part of visual pathway, you know that. Now visual pathway, just recapitulate, right? Fibers, the light rays falls on the pigment cell layer, right? Then to the rods and cones, and then to the first order neurons. By the way, it's the second, if it's asked optic nerve is made up of which order neurons, so remember that it's the second order neurons. These are placed in the 8th layer of the retina. There are 10 layers, right? So 8th layer is the plexiform layer. So no, not the it's like the 8th layer is made up of ganglionic cell layer. Yes, so 8th layer is made up of second order neurons of visual pathway. So optic nerve, which you call a nerve, is made up of second order neurons of the ganglionic cell layer. And then these optic nerve, they form optic chiasma, optic tract, and that nasal fibers decussate, temporal fibers do not decussate, and they reach to the LGB, lateral geniculate body, and that also has 6 different layers, which I'll teach you in detail. You can go through my optic nerve lecture when you can revise this. So from LGB, let me tell you, before LGB, what happening is that this optic nerve, when it reaches LGB, it actually divides into a lateral and a medial root. The medial root is a thin root, lateral root is a wider root which joins, bigger root which joins the LGB. The lesser root, thin root, that is the medial root of the optic tract, which forms the supraoptic chiasma, while the majority of the fibers they reach in the LGB. So from LGB, the majority of the fibers they go backwards and form the optic radiation, to which they reach to the primary visual cortex in the calcarine sulcus, area 17. While from LGB, few fibers on the lateral root, few fibers will from LGB, few fibers will move medially along to this superior brachium and will reach the superior colliculus. Got it? Then via the superior colliculus, the fibers will relay here in the pretectal nucleus, and from pretectal nucleus, this the fibers will now, this pretectal nucleus will send fibers to the this actually has a little bit correction here. These fibers actually reach down to here, both the sides, to the oculomotor nucleus, right? And that includes Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Basically it reaches to the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which is a part of oculomotor nuclear complex. Got it? So that means with the light source in front of your eyes, the impulses are reaching to both the Edinger-Westphal nucleus because of this pretectal nucleus, which sends fibers both the sides. Similarly, there will be fibers from here also, LGB, then superior brachium, superior colliculus, pretectal, then from here the fibers will reach here also and will reach here also. That means the fibers from pretectal nucleus innervate Edinger-Westphal nucleus of both the sides. Very important. That's why I'm telling you this leads to the consensual light reflex. And from there what happens, this Edinger-Westphal nucleus sends its fibers, the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers will pass along with the oculomotor nerve into the orbit, then through this lower division of oculomotor nerve to the nerve to inferior oblique. There's a ganglion attached called ciliary ganglion, where they'll relay. Then the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers will pass out. Then remember, through the short ciliary nerves, through the nerve to inferior, that was about the sympathetic pathway. Look here. Then through the this nerve to inferior oblique, these fibers will reach to supply the constrictor pupillae and the ciliaris muscle for accommodation. If you have got this funda clear, make sure you're getting everything clear, because this will lead to a lot of clinical conditions. Innervating the Edinger-Westphal both the sides by the pretectal nucleus stimulates the parasympathetic outflow to both the eyes. So that means if you are pointing torch in one eye, there will be constriction of pupil in both the eyes, right? Because sensations reaching to this are actually spreading to both the sides, right? Sensations reaching to this, visual sensations are reaching to both the Edinger-Westphal, and that's why reaching to both the constrictors, both the eyes, constrictor pupillae and ciliaris. So hold on, one other important thing. This constrictor pupillae is fine, but the power of accommodation, let me tell you, the tract which through which you converge your eyes while reading. That's called accommodation. That has a different tract, and that is through the the bundle of white fibers called the longitudinal fasciculus, superior longitudinal fasciculus, which bridges the sensory to the motor areas and reaches to the frontal eye field area and frontal eye field area in the motor cortex. So that has a different course. Means what? Accommodation has a different pathway, and the constriction of pupil in response to visual stimulus is being controlled here. Okay, if you have got to know this, because there is few clinical conditions which I'll discuss later on, and if you have not understood it, you can revise it from my lecture on optic nerve and optic pathway. Okay, now look here. Sorry. If there is, you can see that this lateral fibers of the optic tract which reach here in the superior colliculus, these fibers are to bringing in sensations of light reflect and consensual light reflex. Either you can watch into one single eye for the constriction of pupil in response to light, that is called pupillary or light reflex. And if you are pointing the torch in one eye and with a barrier on the nose, if you are placing your hand on the dorsum of nose and you are looking on the opposite eye, we are not pointing the torch, and if there is constriction on opposite side, that is consensual light reflex. So that both light reflex and consensual light reflex are being controlled through this pathway. Okay, now in case of infection, syphilis is one infection which normally affects the spinal cord, dorsal column also, that's called tapes dorsalis, and even syphilis can attack to this tegmental area, this nucleus, tectum of the midbrain. So if there is infection or any injury or lesion to this pretectal nucleus, obviously the light reflex and the constriction and the consensual light reflex will be lost. Got it? But that person, if tries to read a book, he can focus on he can converge the eyes, he can converge and read the book, because in reading a book you need your ciliaris muscle to constrict the eye lens, converge the eye lens, right? So that means accommodation is intact, because that I told you follows a different pathway. So in this condition where there is lesion of pretectal nucleus, this will lead to loss of light reflex, but accommodation reflex is intact. Such a pupil is called Argyll-Robertson's pupil. Okay, learn it. Super hit question of Viva Voce and your MCQ purposes. Argyll-Robertson pupil, that might be infection, mainly syphilis in the tectum of the midbrain involving the pretectal nucleus, and that will result in Argyll-Robertson's pupil, where there will be no response to light reflex, but the power of accommodation is intact. Okay, so we have done with the gray matter. Now the white matter fast. So when this oculomotor nerve emerges from its nucleus and it passes down ventrally straight, crossing through this red nucleus, and then it emerges on the ventral aspect of the crus cerebri, On the ventral aspect, there is a sulcus here called oculomotor sulcus, from where this nerve emerges medial to the two crus cerebri in the interpeduncular fossa. Okay. Then you have the red nucleus here. This is also hallmark feature of this section at the level of upper superior colliculus. Red nucleus has a lot of communications afferents and a lot of efferents. Now red nucleus, remember, is actually a part of extrapyramidal descending tracts, and this receives, you can see here that red nucleus receives fibers from the cerebral cortex and from the globus pallidus, from subthalamic nucleus, from the superior cerebellar peduncles, right? And the efferents will pass to the thalamus, subthalamic nuclei, then to the reticular formation, olivary nucleus. Olivary means inferior olivary, because superior olivary, don't confuse, superior olivary is for auditory pathway and all balancing and all, it's all for related with inferior olivary. So it reaches to the inferior olivary and to the spinal cord. Efferents pass out like this. So this entire pathway of afferents reaching to red nucleus and then efferents emerging out from the red nucleus, they form the rubrospinal tract, rubro-olivary tract, और जो भी efferents से tracts बनेंगे name according to the names. The purpose I am telling is, even the cerebellar fibers reach to the red nucleus through the superior cerebellar peduncles. The purpose of this red nucleus is to control the tone of the muscles, of the opposite limbs, to control the tone of the muscles of opposite limb, mainly by inhibiting the extensors and flexing and stimulating the flexors and inhibiting the extensors of muscles of opposite limbs. That is how the cerebrospinal tract controls the tone of the muscles. Got it? So that's what about the red nucleus is, and this nerve passes through to this red nucleus. And remember what happens if red nucleus is damaged, right? So what happens? There will be you can say twitching and flickering of fingers, like what I mean to say is somewhat like Parkinsonian state, or some tremors. You'll find tremors and twitches in the opposite limbs if there is injury to this red nucleus, and those are called the features of extrapyramidal pathway. In case of any damage to the cerebellar pathway, then we say that is ataxia. So confirm this thing, because there will be a lot of questions now with ischemia related lesions related to different areas of the brainstem. There are even questions asked in exam with different syndromes. So you should have an idea that if this portion is damaged, what's going to happen. As I told you, in case of pyramidals, there is always paralysis of the opposite side. In case of red nucleus, there is lesion, there will be extrapyramidal features seen on the opposite limb, loss of those extrapyramidal like features, like as I told you, tremors and twitching of the muscles. Okay, so, and in case if there is any lesion of the cerebellar pathway, then there will be ataxia. Okay, then here the fibers from this tectum of the midbrain, they also move in front and they decussate here to reach the opposite half, and then they descend down in the form of tectospinal tract, and this decussates and reaches down to the nuclei of the accessory nerve as well as nuclei of the anterior horn of spinal cord in these cervical segments. So the purpose of this tectospinal tract, which actually the tract you will find you have seen already in the lower section of the midbrain, here you seeing is the decussation, and this is the dorsal tegmental decussation. So what fibers are passing here is the tectospinal and tectobulbar tract, and as I told you, bulbar means the fibers which will reach to the motor nuclei of the brainstem are from 7th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. These nuclei, these fibers from tectum, they will reach to these nuclei. They will tectobulbar tract, and the fibers will still reach down in the anterior of the spinal cord. They will called tectospinal tract. The purpose of this tract is visuoprotective reflex. I taught you in detail while I was teaching you about the oculomotor, trochlear and abducent nerve. If you still not have understood it, go and revise from those lectures. Okay, then fibers emerging efferents from the red nucleus, they also decussate at the same level and reach to the opposite side, and they will descend down in the lower segment. You've already seen is rubrospinal tract. So they decussate and reach to the opposite side. They are also both tectospinal, rubrospinal, they are also extrapyramidal tracts. So these fibers will form from the red nucleus, they will form ventral tegmental decussation. ठीक. So tectospinal, tectobulbar, basically I told you the purpose is visuoprotective, is something approaching your eye, you move your head, you blink your eyes and you tilt your head, or even you jump out from your place, though that is called visuoprotective reflex. And reflex movements of the eyes and head and neck in response to the visual stimulus, that is called the visuoprotective reflex. Rubrospinal, I have told you, is to maintaining the tone of the opposite limb muscles by inhibiting extensors and flexing stimulating the flexors. What is left here is nothing is actually left. This is the necklace formed by the the necklace is formed by MTSL, MTS, but the L is missing. Why is L missing? Because lateral lemniscus ascends and from the inferior colliculus they reach out to the medial geniculate body, so you don't find the lateral lemniscus in the upper section of the midbrain. So these are the three lemniscus you will find here. Medial longitudinal bundle as it is you will find here. And what else remains? Reticular formation will be same in the segment below. Hold on. Then the superior colliculus, they also intercommunicate through these commissural fibers, right? That's called posterior commissure. So there is also white fiber in the tectum area posteriorly, which communicates the two inferior colliculus, called posterior commissure. Okay, I think all of the important information that I could have given here I have completed with it. So there I complete with the internal structure of the midbrain.